The cabin door stood open to the night. He stepped into the doorway with his rifle held loose at his side, and what he saw stopped his heart cold. 12 riders in a half circle around his ranch, torches burning, horses stamping in the darkness. And there, standing just behind him in the threshold, was the woman he'd sheltered, silhouetted against the lamplight inside. Her brothers had come. The tallest one, a man with a scar running down his jaw, raised his hand. The riders went still. The only sound was the wind and the creaking of leather saddles. "Send her out," the scarred man called, his voice cut through the night like a knife. "Send her out, and we ride on. Keep her, and we burn everything." The woman's hand touched his shoulder from behind, just barely, just enough to say, "I'm here. I'm real. This is happening." He didn't move. "You've got until sunrise," her brother said. "After that, there's no mercy. Not for her, not for you." The torches burned brighter in the darkness, casting long shadows across the land. Everything the title had warned about stood right there in that moment. The shelter offered, the midnight hour, the brothers arriving with fire and threat. The frontier held its breath. But before this moment shattered their world entirely, let me take you back to where it all began. That morning had started like any other morning on his small ranch. The sun came up over the ridge. He'd walked the perimeter, checked the fences, moved the cattle to fresh grass. His name was Thomas, though most people just called him by the look in his eyes. The kind of man who'd learned to live alone because living alone meant you didn't have to lose anything. He was 32 years old and had never let anyone close enough to matter. The routine was all he needed. Work at dawn, work until the heat drove him inside, sit on the porch at evening, go to bed, and wake up and do it again. That was his life, and he'd made peace with it being small and solitary. Then in the late afternoon, when the light was turning golden and the day was reaching its end, he saw her. A woman on horseback, riding hard, riding like something was chasing her. She came from the direction of town, and when she reached his gate, she didn't ask permission. She just rode straight toward his house and pulled hard on the reins so that her horse reared up in a cloud of dust. She was beautiful the way a wild animal is beautiful, fierce and frightened at the same time. "I need shelter," she said, not even dismounting. "Just tonight. Just until morning. Please." He should have sent her away. Every part of his hard-earned wisdom told him to point her back toward town, back toward the church, back toward anyone but him. But her eyes held something that broke through his walls like nothing ever had before. They held desperate hope. "Come inside," he said. And nothing was ever the same after that. Over the hours that followed, she told him her story in pieces. Her name was Catherine. She came from a ranch 2 days' ride north, where her father had ruled like a frontier king, and her 3 brothers enforced his will like soldiers. They controlled everything: the money, the land, the future. They controlled her. She told him about the arranged marriage they'd planned without asking her. A man from down south, a cattle baron with cruel hands and a reputation for keeping women as possessions. She'd been told to prepare her dress, to smile, to stop asking questions. But when she rode into town that day and heard the man laugh, a laugh that held no kindness, something broke inside her. So she took a horse from the stable and rode. As Thomas listened, he noticed small things that made the moment strange. The way she would go quiet at sudden sounds, her whole body tensing. The way she stood at the window and looked out at the darkness like she expected it to swallow her whole. The way she sometimes looked at him with gratitude so deep it frightened him. By evening, she sat by his fire, and they talked about things that didn't matter: books, weather, the way the land looked different depending on where you stood. But beneath those words was a current of something else. Something like a man and woman recognizing each other across a frontier that didn't usually allow such recognition. He noticed she didn't ask him to send her on. She didn't mention leaving at first light. And he noticed something worse. He didn't want her to leave. Around midnight, Thomas stepped outside and looked at the road stretching away into darkness. He had a strange feeling, like a warning in his bones, the kind of feeling a man gets when he's about to make a choice that will tear his life apart. He could feel her brothers coming, though they weren't visible yet. He could feel them the way an animal feels a storm approaching. And he knew in that moment that he was about to stand against them.
The next day passed in a strange stillness. Catherine woke and looked at him with a question in her eyes that she was afraid to speak. He answered it anyway. "You can stay as long as you need to stay," he said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it." She went pale. "You understand what that means?" "Yes," he said, and he did. By afternoon, the town had grown quiet in the way a town grows quiet before thunder. People on the street stopped talking and looked away. The sheriff rode out to Thomas's ranch and warned him, his hat in his hands, his voice apologetic but firm. "Her family's not going to let this go," the sheriff said. "They've got honor to defend, way they see it, and they've got money to hire muscle. You're harboring a woman against her family's wishes, Thomas. That's not going to end quiet." By evening, there were tracks in the dirt leading toward the ranch. Fresh tracks, more than one rider. Thomas climbed the ridge behind his property and saw them coming from a distance. A group of riders moving steady through the fading light, torches already lit against the growing darkness. He came back down and found Catherine in the cabin. "They're here," he said, "or they will be when the sun sets completely." She stood up, and for a moment she looked like she was about to ask him one final time if he wanted her to leave, to ride away and face them alone. But he was already moving, checking his rifle, loading it, placing it by the door. "I'm not letting them take you," he said. And in saying those words, he crossed a line from which there was no return. He was choosing her. He was choosing this moment. He was choosing everything it would cost. The sky turned orange, then red, then black. And the brothers arrived. The confrontation came like a storm breaks open. 12 riders in a circle around his ranch, torches burning bright enough to push back the night. Her oldest brother in front, the one she'd called Marcus, with a voice like a whip. "You've got one chance," Marcus shouted. "Send her out, and you'll live to see another sunrise. You keep her, and you'll answer to every gun I've hired." Thomas stepped into the doorway, Catherine behind him, her hand on his shoulder. "She's not going," Thomas said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the darkness like a blade. "You don't know what you're fighting for," Marcus spat. "That woman is our family shame. She's property, boy. She belongs to us." "She belongs to herself," Thomas replied, "and she's staying." The silence that followed was violent. Thomas could feel his heart pounding like it was trying to break out of his chest. He knew that sunrise wouldn't come gentle. He knew that these men had come prepared for blood. He knew that his small cabin and his single rifle stood no chance against 12 mounted men with hired guns. But he also knew something his opponents didn't understand. He was fighting for something while they were only fighting against it. Catherine squeezed his shoulder harder. "Sunrise, Thomas," Marcus called. "You've got until first light. Then we come in and take her, and we bury what's left of you in the desert where nobody will find you." The riders pulled back just enough to form a perimeter around the ranch. They settled in to wait, to watch, to make sure no one tried to run under cover of darkness. Inside the cabin, Thomas realized he was trapped, not by the riders outside, but by his own choice, and he didn't regret it. In the hours before dawn, something shifted. Thomas and Catherine sat by the fire, and the story finally came all the way out, the full truth beneath the title. She told him about a young man she'd met a year ago, someone from the neighboring ranch, someone her brothers had forbidden her from seeing because his family wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't powerful enough. They'd made her promise to forget him, but she hadn't forgotten. "That's why they're marrying me off," she said. "That's why they're so angry, because I chose him over them, and when I realized they would kill him if I didn't disappear, I ran." I felt something break inside my chest. I'd been thinking that she'd chosen him in this moment, but the truth was more complicated. She'd chosen her own freedom. She'd chosen to protect someone she loved enough to leave everything behind. "Are you regretting me now?" she asked quietly. He took her hand. "No, but I understand now why you were so afraid. I understand why you needed shelter." "The man I loved before," Catherine said, "I thought that was the greatest risk I could take. Loving him meant risking my family's anger. But this," she looked at Thomas with tears in her eyes, "this is worse. This is risking your life. And you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." In that moment, the emotional truth surfaced between them like something rising from deep water. It wasn't about romance the way stories usually told it. It was about something harder and truer. It was about a man who'd spent his whole life running from connection, finally choosing to stand still. It was about a woman who learned to believe that her own choices mattered, and in choosing her own freedom, she'd given him his. "Whatever happens when the sun comes up, I want you to know that you gave me something I didn't know I needed. You gave me a choice. You gave me a night where someone chose me, not my brother's version of me, not the woman they wanted me to be, but me." Thomas pulled her close, and they sat there in the firelight while the hours burned down and the dawn approached like a judgment.
When dawn came, it came quietly. The sky turned from black to gray to gold, and the torches around the ranch began to look weak and small in the growing light. Thomas woke Catherine from where she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. "We're not fighting them," he said. "We're leaving." Behind the ranch, he had 2 fast horses already saddled and ready. They'd been ready since the moment he decided to let her stay. He and Catherine rode out the back way, through the ravine where the riders couldn't see them until it was too late. By the time Marcus realized they were gone, Thomas and Catherine were already 2 miles away, riding hard toward the ridge country. Her brothers caught sight at him as they crested the far ridge, and Marcus shouted orders for pursuit, but it was too late. The distances were too great, the frontier too wide. By the time the sun was fully up, Thomas and Catherine were headed north toward the mountains, toward the vast open country where a man and woman could start something new. Back at the ranch, the riders found only an empty cabin and the fire burned down to coals. Thomas stood in the doorway and realized what had happened. His sister hadn't been taken, she'd been sheltered. And in being sheltered, she'd found her courage. The frontier changed in that moment, though it was a quiet change that nobody would write down in the official records. A woman had asked for shelter and received it, and a man had chosen love over safety. Thomas and Catherine rode until the ranch disappeared behind them completely. They didn't have much, just the clothes on their backs, the horses beneath them, and the knowledge that they'd chosen each other, when choosing each other meant losing everything. But they had something more valuable than property or position. They had a choice, a real choice. and a life built on that choice, not on what other people decided for them. The frontier doesn't give easy endings, but sometimes it gives true ones, and that's worth everything. Thank you for listening to this tale here on Frontier Love Tools. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of something true about the choices we make and the courage it takes to live by them, then don't ride off just yet. There are more stories waiting beneath the western sun. Tales of love tested by betrayal, of hearts breaking and healing, of people who stood firm when standing firm meant losing everything familiar. Make sure you subscribe to Frontier Love Tools, because out here, every sunset hides another story waiting to be told. Stories about ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. Stories about the frontier, not the geography, but the frontier inside the human heart, where we all must decide what we're willing to fight for. Because love still rides out there, friend. It still rides hard across this land. And that's the real story the frontier teaches us. Subscribe now, and I'll see you next sunset.